Hello everyone, thank you for joining this, our keynote panel at PAY360, which is on mastering the post-PSD2 landscape, open banking trends and opportunities around the globe. I'm Alison Donnelly, a Payment Services Regulation Specialist, Director of the Compliance Consultancy fscom, and leader of the Emerging Payment Association's Project Regulator. And I have the great job, I'm delighted to be moderating the keynote panel today, and we're going to be joined today by some esteemed colleagues in the payments world. So let's turn to the panelists. I'm going to ask each one to introduce themselves in turn, and I'm going to ask them how they found lockdown. How did you get on in lockdown? What were your experiences? So Jordana, can I ask you to introduce yourself first, please?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Jordana Cohen. I lead open banking for Visa Europe. I would say from a lockdown perspective, I surprised myself by how much I love television and how amazing I was as a television binge watcher. So it was great to find this new talent during lockdown.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Brian, can you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, I'm Brian Hanrahan. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Sentenial and the General Manager for our subsidiary, Nuapay. We're an account-to-account and open banking TPP. So we're, yeah, to be honest, I found it kind of stressful at the beginning, and I've developed a great appreciation for the teachers who normally prevent my children from wandering around the house all day. So that was the main thing, but no, overall it was okay. I was happy to work from home, and that worked out pretty okay.
Thank you, Brian. I can definitely associate to that one. Thank you. Becky, can we go to you next, please?
Hi, I'm Becky Clements. I'm Director of Payments at UK Finance, which is a trade body. I've worked in payments since I left school. So I've done about 20 years with RBS, 4.5 years with Metro Bank, and took this role about 2.5 years ago. Lockdown. I like working from home. I like not having to get on the tube, but what I really miss is eating out. I hate cooking, and it's just so nice to have someone else cook your dinner for you.
Thanks, Becky. Again, another experience that I can share and relate to. Thank you. And Brendan, would you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, certainly. Good morning, everyone. I'm Brendan Jones. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer of Konsentus. My background is I've spent way too many years in the card and payments industry, right back to where we actually thought we were being completely transformative, implementing chip and pin onto cards instead of magnetic stripe. And when you look at where we are today with open banking, how minor was that as a project as we moved forward to compared to where we are today. So I set up Konsentus with two co-founders, and I suppose lockdown to me, the biggest frustration has been, even though I'm absolutely useless at playing golf, I love it with a passion, and I love walking around the golf courses. So as soon as they were closed down, my one lifeline to reality was cut away. But thankfully, times have changed and we're back out there getting more frustrated than ever.
That's it, Brendan. Back to the golf course and back to the eating out for Becky. And unfortunately, Brian and I have to wait for the schools to reopen for us to get our relief there. Let's move to some of the more serious, sensible questions. I'm interested to find out how you think open banking has fared through lockdown, and whether the economic crisis that we're beginning to see unveiling now will cause difficulties for the open banking and perhaps even the banking sector more generally. Brendan, can we go to you first?
Yes, certainly. I think it's interesting what's happened over the last 3 months. At Konsentus, we publish what we call our third-party provider tracker, which shows the number of third parties that are regulated to operate, not just in the UK, but obviously across the whole of the EA. And I think what was interesting, in the last 3 months, we've actually seen a 29% increase in third parties across the whole of the EA. And that's an additional 82 new third parties being regulated to operate. And we're starting to see a real mix of these third parties come into the market. Some being regulated purely as AISPs, some being regulated, or sorry, I should say account information service providers, get rid of some of the acronyms, some being regulated as account information and payment initiation service providers, but only about 21 at the moment that are delivering payment initiation. So we're seeing quite a vibrant ecosystem still flourish even in these very, very challenging times. And I think we see sort of COVID and the economic crisis as a real opportunity for open banking. You know, if we take, for example, lockdown and the implications that's had on people's incomes, you know, households have got much more variable incomes than what they've had over the last number of years, where we've had a great amount of stability. And this is going to really cause, I think, issues and problems for people looking forward when they're looking for things like loans and mortgages and so on. However, when you look at some of the services now that open banking is starting to deliver, you know, we see organisations out there today that are offering what I call true income and expenditure analysis by having the ability to directly access people's accounts. So, you know, we don't have to look back at the old days where affordability and credit scoring were via the old credit rating agencies and so on. We can look at people's accounts, we can see where they are today. And there are some great applications out there. One I came across recently was Credit Kudos, who will really offer this. So I think a consensus as we look and see what's going across Europe, and we're a pan-European focused business, not just a UK one. We believe that COVID's going to continue to increase the drive and demand for access to accounts and data, not only by the individuals themselves looking to try and get access to the data, but also service professionals such as accountants, mortgage companies, loan origination, whatever it may be. But more and more people are now utilising digital channels. I think that's set to increase as we move forward, as there's continued uncertainty in the market about COVID and what's next for us.
Thank you, Brendan. Can I go to Becky? Do you have any insight into the use of open banking during lockdown?
So I think that as the payment industry, we've not been that badly affected with COVID. I think in the beginning there was quite a bit of a cry for help. You know, how are the volunteers going to be paid by people who are shielding? And I think we've actually started to move at a better pace in the industry, and I think that will accelerate open banking. And I hope that we keep working at that pace. One example of working at pace is the contactless card limit. You know, within about 6 weeks, we put the limit up from £30 to £45. If that can be done across the industry with open banking and things like that, you know, we really can make a big difference. You know, normally something like the contactless limit uplift would have taken the industry 18 months to do. But we really did just sort of work at pace, and everyone worked from home, and it really was good. So let's hope we can continue to do that, and it really helps with the uptake of open banking.
I think that's a really interesting point, and particularly connected with Brendan's comment earlier about the growing number of third-party providers. I know those third-party providers probably had their application in a lot longer ago, Brendan, before the pandemic struck. But nonetheless, I work in a compliance consultancy, and the one thing that surprised me most about lockdown was the number of new applicants that came to us looking to apply for authorization. Now, not all third-party providers, Brendan, unfortunately, but you know, across the piece, payment service providers, is there something about a crisis that brings the entrepreneurial spirit out? And Becky's example of the ability to move very quickly and respond, I think, is very interesting. Can I open that up to Brian?
Yeah, I think actually just building on what you just said there, what we're sensing is that, you know, like I suppose at a high level, like turmoil or change like this is just really good for removing inertia, you know, which I think is actually one of the biggest barriers for open banking. And, you know, right now people are questioning everything, but also, like, you know, why they do things in the old ways, and you know, that's ideal for open banking adoption. It's exactly the kind of context that you want. So, like, I think in practical terms, we've seen some people do some really clever things around you know, kind of using open banking for touchless or touch-free payments by QR code. where people need to be remote a bit more, like restaurants printing QR codes on bills, and charities trying to find other ways to raise money when they don't have the face-to-face contact. So it's unleashed a lot of innovation, and I think it should boost progress, I think.
Thank you. And sort of allied to that, then I suppose the next question really is, the situation may change, but do consumers, are they able to keep pace with the change that we want to see? And I see that that we're thinking that there's an estimate of 1 million users have been using open banking. Is that where we would expect to be at this stage in the development of the journey, or is there a disappointment that that's not as higher than it could possibly be? Who'd like to take that one? Jordana, would you like to take that one first?
Sure. Just to add on to the previous comment, I think we've also seen a huge amount of acceleration from existing shifts in consumer behavior. So we'd already been seeing consumers, shift towards contactless, towards digital, towards these different mechanisms. And what COVID did is it really just created an acceleration for all of that. And I think going into open banking and seeing an increase in usership, it really comes down to also thinking about all the different use cases that open banking can enable, and where are we in those stages of enablement. And we think about open banking payments and be able to create a robust payment infrastructure and creating, happy path and non-happy path type of use cases. It really creates a lot of functionality, a lot of stability, a lot of things are needed to be able to grow payments, to be able to do both, the easy stuff and all of the stuff when things don't work as planned. And so I think that what we're going to continue to see is that as an industry, if we focus on making sure that it always works for consumers, because that's the number thing that consumers want, is they want to make sure that when they make a payment, it always works. If we can really ground ourselves in that and support them no matter the type of use case, I think we'll continue to see open banking adoption start to grow, especially within payments.
Brendan.
Yeah, no, thanks. I always find that consumer awareness is always a difficult topic to comment upon. But, I've said the number of TPPs are now coming through into the market. And again, let me look at this maybe from a more European perspective, if I may, Alison, opposed just to the UK. And obviously we know that Europe is at least 18 months, if not 2 years behind the adoption and the transaction flows that we see from open banking in the UK today. But every European country now has got at least 50 TPPs, which are authorised to promote services in those jurisdictions. So it is really growing. And to me, it's about the consumer proposition. So I think I'm with Jordana on this one. It's all about the consumer proposition. And if I might just go back to my old cards analogy, which I started with originally, if we were able to poll the audience in real time and say to them, in the last 3 months, how many of you made an RFID payment versus how many of you made a contactless payment? I would hazard a guess that 0 will hold their hand up to the RFID payment, but probably everyone would hold their hand up to the contactless payment, because it's a use case. It's something they understand. It's not an underlying technology. And we promote open banking really as a technology, but at the end of the day, it's about applications out there, applications that engage people. And I get slightly worried when we talk about open banking, because I think a lot of consumers out there today, when they hear the term open banking, it worries them, and they wrongly believe that their information may be shared inappropriately, without their control, without their consent. And we know that's not the case. We're in the industry, but we're at the coalface. Consumers aren't. So it's about strength of proposition. And in order to gain greater adoption, I think as an industry, we need to support those third-party providers, whether that be fintechs, whether that be existing financial institutions, to promote these new services, which just happen to use a different adoption rails to the ones that have traditionally been used today.
And how do we go about doing that, Brendan? Where's the, is that an industry-led initiative? Is it broader than that?
Yeah, I firmly do believe it is. I believe it to be, at least within Europe, let's focus on Europe, I believe it to be a regulatory stroke industry-led type initiative. At the end of the day, as an industry, we are investing lots of money in this new infrastructure, and we want to ensure that it delivers upon the the vision and the propositions and so on that open banking is to do so. And again, sorry if I just showed my age here. Let me go back to the old cards analogy yet again. At least in the UK here, when we moved to chip and pin, it was an industry initiative. All the banks came together. They didn't agree coming together, and I had the pleasure of sitting on the APAC steering committee with all of them representing the bank. And there's a lot of to and fro, but ultimately the industry all moved together, and we were able, literally overnight in that particular instance, able to start really putting in controls against card present fraud, which at that point was really running out of control, down to more or less next to zero, because we moved as an industry. And I think we should be doing that again to engage consumers as to the new propositions that are out there, the art of what is possible for them. The facts on an open banking rail, to me, is irrelevant.
So that speaks to the use case being there. Does anybody have any good examples of use cases that they've seen that could provide the tipping point?
Yeah, like I think there's the really interesting link between the two questions there. Actually, so the usage growth and the use case. So there was a really interesting example during lockdown, around kind of open banking payments, where you'll probably anyone in the UK at least will remember the charity campaign related to the 99-year-old Captain Tom. So this man was amazing. He raised £30 million, in the process, and it just became a phenomenon. But what probably not a lot of people know is that he also proved something about open banking. So the charity platform that his donations were raised on had introduced the option to pay by open banking, only a few weeks before, and it put it at the top of the menu as a payment method for people to choose. Just called it bank transfer, not open banking, and highlighted as the fastest way to get your donation into the charity that you were donating to. When his campaign took off, and it was kind of a really interesting little sample because it was so condensed, we actually saw a massive spike in OBIE traffic levels related to it. So several 100,000 people made open banking payments and donations into that campaign. We estimate that about 20% of the population who were donating chose this route rather than the traditional cards and so on. So it's a pretty kind of phenomenal case, and I guess it comes back to the thing about acceptance or even adoption. Is that if it's not on the menu, consumers won't choose it. And in payments in particular, there's a long kind of complex supply chain where first of all PSPs have to get ready, then the merchants have to get ready, and then the consumers are given the option to pay that way. So we're still kind of working through those layers right now. So I think it's probably a little bit early to tell, but I think there's some promising signs in there around growth and acceptance once it's available to people.
Brian, that's a brilliant story. I hadn't heard that before. Becky?
I bet the people didn't even know they were paying by open banking.
Yeah, pretty as it should be. It's.
I think that's a great point too about that you said that it was called bank transfer, and I think that we've been seeing more and more around some consumer research that what is it that consumers understand, and how do you get them both within the flow and to stay within the flow? And open banking right now, it is such an industry term, but how do we need to kind of shift that language, shift how we speak to consumers to make sure that they understand it? And I think a use case is about consent, it's about value, it's about trust, but it's also around how do you make sure that the consumer even knows what they're doing. And I think that we see that so much on the data side, where you need to be extremely clear with what data you're getting access to, making sure consumers understand that. But it's just as important when we come to the payment side as well, to make sure consumers know exactly what's happening throughout the flow, how they're making that payment, where they are in that step in the journey. And those type of things will be really important in terms of getting consumer adoption and also to limit any sort of consumer abandonment.
I think, thank you. I think one interesting thing, again, fully support what Jordana, as I said there. If we look back at FCA early this year when they came out for the call for input for open finance, they put a very interesting table in the document which from a regulator's perspective showed in one column the types of applications they envisaged launching under open banking. Next column was those that they hadn't envisaged that launched, and the third one was ones that are in beta tests that they hadn't envisaged either. And what it just really shows is, and I think we all know this, there's some very, very clever people out there who can know how to use data for the benefit of consumers and so on. And regulators always play catch up ultimately, but under PSD2, obviously the regulator took the lead, and they had a vision of what open banking was, open banking is, yet that's evolved way past their thinking, and we're only really still at the start of a journey.
Thanks, Brendan. It's interesting, the question about whether this is whether things should be market driven or regulation driven. And of course, whilst in the UK, open banking wasn't a thing, it was a thing elsewhere. In the Netherlands, you know, they often quote a statistic of 55% of payments being made through payment initiation service providers. It's, you know, it's just putting it, the framework of regulation around it increases confidence, which goes to Jordana's point about providing information to consumers and helping them to understand where they are in the chain in order to be able to be confident. But I do also wonder, and I come from this with a sort of consumer policy background as well, there's only so much consumers really want to know about how their payments work. You know, and there is always a, you know, I worked many years ago on the Competition Commission inquiry in Northern Ireland on the big four banks, and you know, the competition result was that yes, it's not working, so let's put information in the hands of consumers and get them to switch. You know, it's like that old switching debate. You know, you can make it very easy, but really nobody still wants to do it because it just still sounds complicated, or where's the incentive? And I'm still interested here. I think we've had some great examples. I just want to check if there are any other examples that people have come across on payment initiation or account information that might lend itself to being the tipping point.
Yeah, I do think there's some really interesting stuff going on in business software as well. So you know, I think you've seen that the account information side of open banking has pretty much replaced all of the legacy batch integrations that those accounting software packages had with banks. And I think what's pretty more transformative is when you put the payment initiation piece into those same, you know, business applications and business software, because then you can kind of, you basically move the, you know, the payment flow inside the business software in a real-time way and out of a bank channel, which previously people had been using a swivel chair to move between, you know, and now you've got it all integrated. And I think that's a huge change. Actually, I think it's probably like there's going to be a battle for the front end of banking, you know, on the back of this stuff. And you know, we're seeing that that's really kind of starting to build momentum now as well.
We'll move on from that subject and talk more about the future of open banking as the entity. The CMA published their approved roadmap for open banking, which takes us through to the end of next year. They, of course, did that during lockdown. So how has the roadmap been received by industry? Becky, could we go to you first on that one?
Yeah, I think the CMA 9, who have funded open banking, want to see a commercial, want to see it monetised. I think they want to see it in a more of a scheme rather than you know, being dictated. They feel they're being dictated by the CMA. The CMA order will come to an end eventually, and then it's how do they take it forward, you know, to recoup some of their money, because you know they've paid for everything and they've got TPPs who are using like open sourced APIs and eating their lunch.
Which it definitely won't be uncontroversial. Brian, do you have any comments?
Yeah, like I think the roadmap that's come out is, you know, it's just I suppose it's another example of OBIE kind of moving the industry forward. I think it's, you know, and CMA obviously as well. You know, it's got 13 significant kind of areas of improvement. You know, for us, I think it opens up probably the most interesting thing is variable recurring payments and the sweeping use case. You know, so that's, you know, that really kind of is basically bringing in a long-lived consent for payments, and you know that makes a whole ream of use cases possible, and a much wider you know, opportunity, I think, for businesses and merchants and also consumers. So yeah, look, I think that the evolution is interesting. I think there is room for some discussions at industry level around how like the value distribution should apply. I suspect there's probably going to be some discussions around that related to this variable recurring payment piece, because not all of it's going to be mandated. So yeah, look, I think there's there's really good progress, and OBIE is doing some kind of really important work. It's hopefully it'll be subsumed into something which is just as proactive.
Thanks, Brian. Jordana, do you want to comment on that one?
Sure. I think that, just to echo what everyone's saying, I think, it's interesting to also think about how open banking is starting to play out around the world. So as you were mentioning previously, we're seeing kind of two models start to form, one more of a market-driven approach and one that's more of a regulatory approach. And I think what we're going to increasingly see into the future is these hybrid models start to form across markets. So we're seeing some markets that have started with market-driven, starting to look at how do you put some sort of regulatory principles around how they're thinking about open banking. And separately, you're thinking of Europe, who started as, a regulatory type of open banking infrastructure and potentially now moving more into premium or commercial type of APIs as well. And I think what's interesting is to see how across both, I think if we as an industry can stay grounded in, fundamentals of, security and trust and consent and these key principles for us as an industry, then we can make sure that we maintain the confidence in electronic payments across markets.
Thank you. Brendan, do you want to jump in on that one as well?
Yeah, I think I probably take a slightly different view to the other members of the panel here regarding open banking in the UK. Obviously, what we have in the UK here from a PSD2 European perspective is very different. We have a central entity there that, as we know, was brought together due to the CMA order. And we are very supportive of the roadmap and where the roadmap ultimately goes. But I think we have a concern with what OBIE becomes after the order is fulfilled and so on. But we're also at a point where we're slightly surprised that there's no plan by OBIE to deliver on certain aspects of the order. And what I'm very much referring to here is a set of standards, for example, around directory services, whereby it is all being run by one entity today, which we do not see happening across the rest of Europe. And we're not sure how the CMA order can be fulfilled until that aspect is delivered, because the consequence of that is ultimately you're not opening the market up for the CMA 9 or even the other banks to choose on service providers. It's purely being given to one organisation.
And of course, unfortunately, we don't have a representative from OBIE to speak to that point. Becky, what's the views in the sector from the trade association point of view on that?
That is a really good thought, actually, Brendan. I hadn't really thought about that, and there being no competition for a service provider. I think the UK probably needs a standard authority which looks after sort of messaging and the directory standards and API standards and things like that. And that would open up competition in the UK massively.
Yeah, if I may say, and I agree, Becky, what we want to see happen in the UK for all service providers, whether it be banks, TSPs, is we want to see a competitive, vibrant economy whereby people can choose which services they wish to utilise and so on. And I think the UK, because of the CMA order, has gone slightly down a different route, but there's no reason why it can't be harmonised. I know we're leaving Europe, but there's no reason why we shouldn't still be aligned. Maybe not the right political thing to say in a public forum.
And does that lead into we touched on it before, but about open finance and the feature for open finance as well, Brendan?
Yes, I think it does. Konsentus, we have a view that open banking is purely the start of a journey, and we are in the infancy stages of that journey today. And we see the open economy opening up to be the broader aspects of open finance, but also open data. And we've already seen the European Commission put papers out, for example, talking about the big tech companies, whereby if somebody tries to enter the market today, they're immediately disadvantaged because of the data those big tech companies hold. Therefore, they should, if the user wishes to share that data, they should be able to. So I think this whole ecosystem is at the start of a very, very long journey. It will only become more complex. I think in order to ensure that we have a secure, open ecosystem that consumers and businesses alike are happy and willing to engage in, then you need investment in services, in technology and so on, as we go down this roadmap and on this journey. And from a Konsentus viewpoint, when we started, we didn't necessarily know where we were going to end up, but we've got a clearer view today. But I'm sure that roadmap will continue to evolve as we carry on what I can only call very exciting journey. And
Brendan, you mentioned Brexit, so looking to the rest of the world, do we have a possibility with our model here to lead and set the example elsewhere, or do we have more to gain from examples elsewhere? Brendan, if you wanted to start.
Yeah, certainly. I genuinely, look, I can put my view out there about open banking, but let's be honest, it's done some tremendously good things. And one of the great things I think it has done is a UK open banking standard. Okay, when you look at the other standards that are in Europe today, the UK open banking standard to me is much more mature. It's been much more thought through in terms of its architecture and also versus its implementation. And it's an open source specification. So why not look to promote that around the world for adoption into other countries? So we truly have global open banking, not on a country or region by region basis. And I think I'm all for picking the best out of things and promoting them elsewhere where they can be leveraged upon and they can be utilized. And people don't end up reinventing wheels. And then we just have systems that don't integrate with each other, don't communicate with each other. It's like talking 20 years ago in banking, wasn't it? When you're trying to move money from one country to another, it was a real a neck-ache. But these days it's very straightforward. It's automatic. So yes, let's take the best. Let's go promote it.
Jordana.
Yeah, I think that, I think what the UK has done extremely well is they've put open banking on the map from an industry perspective. And I think when we talk to, different markets around the world, everyone wants to know, what is the UK doing? What's happening in the UK? And I think that that's an amazing thing as an industry to kind of be able to tout that you are kind of figuring out and leading and, seeing what works and doesn't work and adapting as we go. And I think just as we do today within, global payments, different markets have different needs, different dynamics. They might have, different types of use cases that form based on that, based on what their consumer preferences are. So I think that we'll have, standards across as an industry that we all can, ground ourselves in when it comes to security, the authentication experience, trust and so on. But I think the different types of use cases across markets are going to shift and change. And based on that, we might need some different types of ways of, using open banking across different markets as well.
Brian, can I let you speak to the global point as well?
Yeah, sure. Look, I think the open finance consultation and the trend it's a great opportunity for the UK to just build on the leading position it already has in open banking. I think it's pretty powerful economic infrastructure. Open finance, if done as expected, will definitely kind of drive better consumer outcomes, more competition, more innovation in lots of other industries, as it has already in in payments and banking, let's say. So I think that's all really positive, and I hope it progresses. It would be good to obviously see us leverage, some of the points actually that Jordy mentioned as well, the trust and security frameworks that have been kind of put into place, and like they're kind of hard fought assets, that should be used in the next phase of open, and it'd be nice to see that. I think in terms of some other input that we'd like to give to the consultation is that a kind of a coordinating body, like equivalent to OBIE, was really valuable. I think that really helped the UK move at pace. We're operating in many other countries as well, and we could see that that OBIE's presence and work has kind of short-circuited the entire industry's progress, in a positive way there. So hopefully there will be an equivalent entity.
And I agree, you know, I think we are, you know, ahead of the rest of the world.
Great, thank you. Moving on now to the final question, just mindful of time here. Project Regulator have published a booklet on views of members of the EPA, looking to PSD3, if there would be such a thing. What would they change? What would they keep? What lessons were there to learn from the UK's experience? We published that in time for the PAY360 when it was originally scheduled, and have had lots of opportunity to discuss and mull through now. And so in the concluding question, I'd like to turn to you all to ask what your thoughts are. You know, you can answer the question whether there should be a PSD3 in the UK, or whether the UK should chart its own course, or whether there's any niggles from the directive and the legislation as it stands that you would very definitely like to see fixed, whether that's open banking related or any of the other broader areas of payment services legislation. Can I go to Jordana first, please?
Sure. You know, I think that what PSD2 and the regulators have always been trying to do is really around spurring innovation, creating more experiences for consumers, making, you know, that experience as personalized as possible. And I think that if we take that as, you know, a grounding element for us as an industry and keep trying to drive towards that and all move towards that as possible, then I think that we're in a good space to kind of keep as an industry adding to what's already there and what's already existing. But I think it really does come down to us collaborating together and focusing on, you know, what were the main ideas of the regulation in the first place. And if we can keep driving to meet those, then I think we're in a good spot as an industry.
Thank you, Jordana. Brian, can I go to you next?
Yeah. Like I think PSD2 and other structures have kind of laid a really good foundation framework. You know, while we're kind of moving into the next stage, I think there does need to be more kind of collaboration. I think there's a lot of interesting discussions taking place bilaterally now around, you know, commercial arrangements, premium APIs, all of these things, which are you know, which should be let run their course. I would say so. It's probably a little bit early to you know, to figure out, you know, what the next round of regulation should be. I think the bodies, you know, both in Europe and in the UK, are kind of maintaining dialogue. They're encouraging progress. You know, I think there's room for that to happen outside of regulation. For now, really the only other point I'd make is, you know, if we were doing a PSD3, maybe we shouldn't necessarily have it start with a P. Like I think it's much more than payments now. You know, we need to get into, you know, thinking more holistically, the data, identity, you know, the wider open finance and what open everything space kind of starts to come into play. So, you know, that's probably needs its own regulation.
I love that, the increasing scope. Thank you. Brendan.
Yeah, well, if there is going to be one, based upon how long it took to get PSD2 into the market and the original Payment Services Directive, I probably would have retired at the point it comes to fruition, sadly. But I think hopefully, yes, there will be a PSD3. And the reason I say that is to fix many of the challenges and ambiguities of PSD2 itself. So again, if I can just look at it from a European perspective opposed to just the UK. If I look at the Dutch regulator, their views on whether EMI should be called under access to accounts or open banking is different from that of the FCA. So, you know, PSD2 was meant to be a maximised harmonised regulation. However, it doesn't matter whether it's a minimum or maximum, it still is interpreted. So maybe PSD3 should be a regulation whereby something like GDPR was, every member state takes it as it is and doesn't have the chance then to necessarily interpret its own rules. And that way we can drive understanding and consistency across the whole community, service providers, consumers, businesses alike. Thank
you, Brendan. Becky.
Brendan, you stole my thunder. I was going to say, if PSD3 comes along, you know, I will be retired before it all goes into all of the banks, because I think we're still rolling out some of PSD2 with strong customer authentication. So that will, you know, continue into next year. So PSD3, if it's the same length as PSD2. We're probably talking 5 or 6 years at least. And I agree with you as well, Brendan. It needs to be interpreted the same all over Europe. We don't want, you know, the differences. And it would be interesting as well whether, because we'll have Brexited by then, what our thoughts are around doing things, you know, in line with Europe. Who knows?
Thank you, everybody. That sounds like we have a bit of consensus on, very definitely on collaboration, possibly on making sure that the European UK experience is not too far removed, that it's more aligned, and that the maximum harmonisation really does mean maximum harmonisation rather than max harm. And obviously the collaboration is a good point there. Can I thank you, all panellists? Thank you so much for your contribution to this discussion. I think it's been a really great start to PAY360, and thank you very much. And if everybody else was here, I would be asking them to applaud you, but I will applaud you instead. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison.
Thank you.
Thanks.